When the weather can't make up its mind, we can help you make up yours. Check on the BBC Weather app.
Tonight at 10, we are live in Edinburgh, where the Scottish National Party has chosen a new leader to replace Nicola Sturgeon.
I therefore declare Hamza Yousaf duly elected as the Scottish National Party leader.
History is made as Hamza Yousaf becomes the first Muslim to lead a major political party in the UK.
I will be a First Minister for all of Scotland. That I will work every minute of every day to earn and to re-earn your respect and your trust.
We'll be looking at the story of the man who's made it to the top of Scottish politics, and we'll be asking about the major challenges he now faces.
And the other main stories tonight. In Israel, mass protests against controversial judicial reforms force a government delay, but tonight it's supporters of the plans who are also on the streets. Prince Harry unexpectedly appears at the High Court, one of several famous names involved in a privacy case. And the families of lost crewmen still searching for answers, exactly 80 years after the sinking of HMS Dasher.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News Channel, we'll have the best of today's Euro 2024 qualifying, including an absolute peach of a pile driver from Pavard, as France go head-to-head with the Republic of Ireland.
Welcome to BBC News at 10, which comes tonight from Edinburgh, on the day a new leader was elected by the Scottish National Party. Hamza Yousaf, who's just 37, is now set to become First Minister of Scotland and to be one of the most powerful and prominent politicians in the United Kingdom. The leadership contest was triggered last month by Nicola Sturgeon's unexpected resignation. She has dominated Scottish politics for almost a decade, and everyone here seems to agree that she will be a tough act to follow. Now, this is what happened in today's result. More than 50,000 members of the SNP voted, with Mr Yousaf taking 52% of the vote on the second round. It is a result that makes history. Mr Yousaf is the first Muslim leader of the SNP and the first Muslim to lead a major party in the UK. Tomorrow, members of the Scottish Parliament will vote on whether to appoint him as the nation's new First Minister. And the list of challenges for the next First Minister is a rather daunting one. We'll be looking at those challenges, and we'll be looking at Mr Yousaf's family story. But first, our Scotland editor James Cook reports on today's result.
With a high five for his daughter, Hamza Yousaf hints at what is about to happen. He's just been told the result, and it shows.
Kate Forbes, 23,890. This represents 47.9% of the final vote. Hamza Yousaf, 26,032. This represents 52.1% of the final vote. I therefore declare Hamza Yousaf duly elected as the Scottish National Party leader.
The margin was tight, the result historic, as Mr Yousaf acknowledged, paying tribute to his late grandparents who came to Scotland from Pakistan in the 60s, speaking barely a word of English.
As Mohammed Yousaf worked in the Singer sewing machine factory in Clydebank, as Rahmat Ali Bhutta stamped tickets on the Glasgow Corporation buses, they could not have imagined, as I say in their wildest dreams, that 2 generations later, that their grandson would one day be on the cusp of being Scotland's First Minister. We should all take pride in the fact that today we have sent a clear message that your colour of skin, or indeed your faith, is not a barrier to leading the country that we all call home.
For the SNP, though, this was a bruising campaign, with Mr Yousaf painted by his rivals as a lightweight who would not, could not deliver independence.
Over the last 5 weeks, we may have been competitors or supporters of different candidates. We are no longer Team Hamza or Team Ash or Team Kate. We are one team, and we will be the team. We will be the generation that delivers independence for Scotland.
You have suggested during this campaign that it will be difficult to fill the shoes of Nicola Sturgeon, and yet on the central defining mission of your party, independence, ultimately, she failed. What makes you think you can succeed where she couldn't?
So first and foremost, I want to pay tribute again to Nicola Sturgeon, because she has left us with a really strong foundation, and we will build upon that foundation. I will build upon that foundation. But it won't just be me. I'm going to build the team that's going to deliver independence.
But will that include Kate Forbes?
There's a space in a broad church like the SNP for differences of opinion, but ultimately we are now united, and we unite behind Hamza.
And still a space for you?
Well, I would hope so.
The narrow margin of victory underlines the scale of the challenge for Hamza Yousaf. It has exposed deep cracks within the SNP, and he'll now have to find a way urgently to reunite his party. But for now, the Scottish Labour leader, who attended a Glasgow private school with Hamza Yousaf, paid tribute.
Look, I think to demonstrate that someone can be elected to a position regardless of their faith and background is of course a significant moment. To have the first ever ethnic minority First Minister is of course a significant moment. But as you know, as is the issue with politics, is we'll get into the nitty-gritty and the real debates and the real arguments about the future of Scotland, and of course I relish doing that. I'm sure he does too.
Personally congratulate him on reaching this position within his party and his hopes to be First Minister tomorrow, but he has to have a full reset for Scotland's economy, for Scotland's health service, for Scotland's education system to deliver for people. And if he insists on focusing on independence above all else, then Scotland will suffer.
Give us a wave!
The Greens don't think so. In 2021, they agreed to share power with Nicola Sturgeon in a deal which looks set to continue.
The Butte House Agreement is the mechanism by which the Greens join the Scottish Government, and the Butte House Agreement does call for 2 ministerial posts to be for Greens. So Patrick Harvey and I do absolutely look forward to continuing to work as part of government on that progressive agenda, working for climate, working for people.
But what do the people make of the result? In sunny Dundee, which bucked the national trend to vote for independence in 2014, this was the reaction to Mr Yousaf's victory.
I'm delighted that it was Hamza who was chosen. I've followed him throughout the campaign, and I feel he's very empathetic.
I quite like Kate Forbes. I thought she was quite feisty kind of thing, you know. I thought she at least she was honest.
Well, my initial thoughts are that he isn't much different to the last SNP leader. And to be honest with you, I think he's going to be quite dangerous for Scotland. He's going to take us down the same road.
And that underlines the scale of the challenge for the history-making Hamza Yousaf. James Cook, BBC News, Edinburgh.
We'll be talking to James Cook, our Scotland editor, here at Holyrood in just a few moments. But before that, let's find out just a little bit more about the man who is about to step onto a much bigger stage, leading the Scottish Government at the age of 37. He was born in Glasgow. His father is from Pakistan, his mother from Kenya's South Asian community. and he's seen very much as the man who wants to maintain the broad approach of Nicola Sturgeon. So to learn a little more about the new SNP leader, our Scotland correspondent Lorna Gordon has been talking to some of those who know him, and just a quick warning, there's some flash photography coming up.
Hamza Yousaf was the continuity candidate in the SNP leadership campaign. He had the weight of support from senior members of his party and was always considered the bookies' favourite to win.
Mayor Hamza Yousaf.
When first elected, he took his oath in English and in Urdu. He's making history as the first Muslim leader of his party and is now on the cusp of becoming First Minister. The 37-year-old grew up in Glasgow, was educated at private school. 9/11 and the Iraq War were formative events in his youth, and it was then that he joined the SNP. He started doing charity work. Those who knew him, though, never thought he would become a politician.
An 18-year-old Hamza Yousaf walks into this shop. I want to volunteer. I said, is that right? OK, get them up, clean the floor, go and clean the toilet. That was his test. Bubbly character, always cracking jokes and lovely engaging with youngsters, other young people like him. When he believes, he passionately believes in it, and his beliefs are very strong, and he works hard.
Hamza Yousaf, Scottish National Party.
The SNP's youngest ever leader has a long record in government, in international development, transport, justice, and most recently overseeing the NHS. His critics say he's lurched from failure to failure. During the leadership campaign, his record in government even came under fire from his main rival for the top job.
When you were Transport Minister, the trains were never on time. When you were Justice Minister, the police were strained to breaking point. And now, as Health Minister, we've got record high waiting times.
It still doesn't exceed.
Improving public services, one of the challenges he now faces, as is reuniting his party after winning by a narrow margin a divisive campaign.
He will have authority amongst his parliamentary colleagues. But fairly soon, his parliamentary colleagues will ask themselves, is he going to save my seat? Is he going to increase support for independence? And the fact that his lead amongst the membership is as narrow as it is means that those kinds of questions are going to get raised perhaps rather sooner than later, if indeed the polling numbers don't move to the SNP's advantage.
So it is possible the honeymoon period may be short. Hamza Yousaf will have a full in-tray and competing demands. For today, though, he describes himself as the luckiest man in the world. Lorna Gordon, BBC News, Glasgow.
Well, picking up on Lorna's point there, by this time tomorrow, it is expected that Hamza Yousaf will have been elected First Minister by his fellow members of the Scottish Parliament here at Holyrood. And then he'll be sworn in on Wednesday, and that's when he takes over formally from Nicola Sturgeon. So let's take a quick look at some of the challenges he'll be facing. First, the ongoing campaign for Scottish independence, where party members will expect the new leader to set out his own strategy. Second, he'll need to deal with the reaction to the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, a highly controversial piece of legislation which has been blocked by the UK government. And third, he will be expected to deal with a health service with record waiting times and an education system that has seen little closing of the academic gap between pupils from wealthy backgrounds and those who are from disadvantaged backgrounds. Well, in a moment, we'll be assessing some of those challenges with James Cook, our Scotland editor, who's with me here in Holyrood. But before that, let's go straight to Westminster and talk to our political editor, Chris Mason. How has this news of the election in Scotland gone down at Westminster, Chris?
Here it illustrates the clout, the political clout of the Scottish National Party. The eyes were glued to the television at lunchtime here. There's been a fascination in this race and its result, and the simple reason for that is numbers. The SNP are the third biggest party here at Westminster, and to draw a contrast, Labour, formerly hugely dominant in Scotland, have just a single MP north of the border. Now look at the actions over the last few weeks of the Labour leader Keir Starmer. Since the announcement of Nicola Sturgeon's resignation, Sir Keir has been to Scotland 4 times, almost once a week since that announcement last month. He hopes that this could be something of an inflection point from his perspective as Labour attempt to regain something of a foothold in Scottish politics as Sir Keir attempts to assemble a majority at the next election. But that is the politics of tomorrow, really. What about the governing of now and the relationship between the Prime Minister and the new First Minister? I expect there'll be a congratulatory call, perhaps as soon as tomorrow, between Downing Street and the new expected First Minister. But however cordial or otherwise their personal relations, there is still the constitutional difference between the two, with the SNP arguing that they have a mandate for another independence referendum and the government here at Westminster answering that with a no. However good the personal relations, that isn't going to change.
Chris, many thanks for now. Chris Mason there at Westminster. Let's turn to James, who's with me. What kind of First Minister is he going to be?
Well, I think the supporters of Hamza Yousaf say that he is going to be a First Minister who will pick up where Nicola Sturgeon left off and carry on but build on the foundations, as he said to me himself today. But principally and crucially, he's going to be very obviously a very different First Minister. 8 years after this place had the first ever female First Minister, he is breaking down barriers himself. But of course, Hugh, when the dust settles, when the delight of his election victory dies down, and that'll happen pretty soon, to be honest, it will become apparent that, as you've outlined a second ago, there are enormous challenges. And what's interesting about the result that we've seen from these Scottish National Party members is it is so divided that tells you there's a lot of people, even within the party, who are not necessarily convinced that he is the man to advance their cause, to take on this challenge. And so the question that you have then at the end is, he needs to be better than Nicola Sturgeon. And Nicola Sturgeon was regarded by the party, and indeed some people out with the party, as one of the greatest campaigners of her generation in UK politics, not just in Scottish politics. Hamza Yousaf has made history once, but his supporters will be pressuring him all the time to make history once again.
Very interesting, James. Thanks very much again. James Cook there, our Scotland editor, and before that, of course, Chris Mason, our political editor. And that's it from Holyrood for tonight. After a very busy day, there's much more analysis and detail online from James and other colleagues, bbc.co.uk/news. And of course, you can access all of that material on the BBC News app. But with that, it's back to you, Clive, in London.
Hugh, many thanks to you and the team in Edinburgh. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has postponed a series of controversial judicial reform bills which have provoked mass protests and a nationwide strike. He says he won't allow a civil war, and the delay until the next session of Parliament will enable dialogue. Now, the reforms would give Israel's most right-wing government in history control over judicial appointments. Opponents say the plans undermine democracy and help Mr. Netanyahu, who's facing an ongoing corruption trial. Well, our Middle East correspondent Tom Bateman is live in Jerusalem for us tonight. Tom, over to you.
Clive, this has been not just a political crisis, but a social one of proportions Israel has never seen in its modern history. Its dissent has spread into the ranks of the military and brought an unprecedented economic shutdown too. And today things reached a tipping point and everyone was asking, when would Mr. Netanyahu speak? The anger has built for weeks, erupting today outside the Israeli parliament. This country is gripped by unprecedented turmoil and a leader who had been refusing to give in.
We're fighting for our democracy and we won't give up.
The brutality of what's happening is overwhelming. And if it continues, it will be irreversible.
All day they demanded Mr. Netanyahu back down, but they were met with silence and security forces.
The police are now pushing the protesters back from this point. We've seen mounted police as the crowd erupts here. This is a battle between the opposition and and Mr. Netanyahu's forces of the far right and the ultra-religious inside the building. And all the while, the rest of the country is coming to a complete standstill. Demonstrators blocked highways and a strike grounded planes at the main airport. Israel was being shut down. While things were boiling over inside the parliament, for months Mr. Netanyahu's coalition has pushed its plans to severely limit the power of the courts, saying the people voted for it. But critics called it a coup by his coalition of the ultra-religious and extreme nationalists. The tipping point was reached last night when he fired his defense minister, who joined the dissent. And today the Israeli leader with his MPs was keeping a country waiting before he went on TV tonight to say he was pausing the legislation. But
there is one thing that I cannot accept. There is an extremist minority that is prepared to tear our country to pieces. It is using violence and incitement. It is stoking civil war, and it is calling for refusal to serve, which is a terrible crime.
Tonight, supporters of the shelved plans are also rallying. Israel's leader unleashed a struggle over the very identity of the state. The protesters have won a concession, but Mr. Netanyahu won't want to lose for long. Tom Bateman, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Prince Harry has unexpectedly appeared at the High Court in London as legal proceedings get underway in a privacy case brought by him and a number of other high-profile figures. They include Sir Elton John and Doreen Lawrence, who were also in court suing Associated Newspapers, which publishes the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday. Here's Tom Simons.
It's only day one of what could be a long legal battle. No witnesses giving evidence, just procedure. So when Prince Harry suddenly turned up, it seemed to send a message. He'll be fighting this battle in person. And it wasn't just him. Elton John arrived next and headed to the plastic seats of Court 76 to sit next to his husband, David Furnish. And then Baroness Lawrence, mother of murdered Stephen. Along with Liz Hurley, Sadie Frost and the former MP Sir Simon Hughes, they're accusing the publisher of the Mail and Mail on Sunday of bugging cars and homes, listening to private telephone calls, paying police officials and obtaining medical and financial records, along with phone hacking. As crowds gathered here inside the court, Harry listened intently to what were often detailed legal arguments. The judge decided that we, the media, can't report some aspects of this case, including the names of around 70 journalists who've been accused. He said that was important to make sure that the process was fair and that the evidence could be heard freely in court. But some of it comes from the Leveson inquiry into the press 11 years ago. Associated Newspapers says it was leaked to lawyers for Prince Harry and the others. If that argument succeeds, part of the case could be thrown out.
Elton, over here, please.
Either way, the publisher vehemently denies the allegations, says it's being sued by 7 well-known people on a fishing expedition with no credible evidence.
We love you, Harry.
Tom Simons, BBC News at the High Court.
Police in the southern US city of Nashville say 6 people, including 3 9-year-old children, have been killed in a school shooting. 2 women and a man, all in their 60s, also died. Their female attacker was shot dead by officers, and it's understood she was a former pupil at the privately run Christian primary school. President Biden has described the shootings as heartbreaking. Our North America correspondent Neda Taufik has the very latest.
Children running for their lives in the midst of yet another mass shooting. This time it happened in Nashville, Tennessee at the Covenant School, a private Christian institution for children between 4 to 12 years old. It was slightly after 10 a.m. when emergency services got the call of an active shooter and rushed to the scene. The response was a swift one, taking officers less than 15 minutes to stop the shooter, a 28-year-old Nashville woman armed with 2 assault rifles and a handgun.
Officers entered the first story of the school, began clearing it. They heard shots coming from the second level. They immediately went to the gunfire. When the officers got to the second level, they saw a shooter, a female, who was firing. The officers engaged her. She was fatally shot by responding police officers.
Before they could get to her, she took 6 lives, 3 of them children. It's believed the female shooter was once herself a student at the school and entered through a side door. What led her to carry out this attack is not yet known. President Joe Biden, addressing the tragedy, said it was about time Congress banned assault weapons.
We have to do more to stop gun violence. It's ripping our communities apart, ripping the soul of this nation, ripping at the very soul of the nation.
Already this year, there have been 13 school shootings that have resulted in deaths or injuries, according to one estimate. Nashville, Tennessee, is just the latest affected community on an ever-growing list. Neda Tawfiq, BBC News, New York.
Let's take a look at some of the day's other top stories now. And schools in England could face further strike action after the National Education Union recommended teachers reject a new pay offer. The government had suggested more cash of £1,000 this year and a rise of 4.3% for most staff next year. But the union says that's well below the settlements reached in Scotland and Wales. More than 130,000 civil servants will take industrial action at the end of next month in their dispute over pay, pensions and job security. The PCS union says the all-out strike on April the 28th follows the failure of the government to increase its pay offer. The PCS represents workers in government departments and at organisations like Ofsted and the Border Force. The public is being urged not to go into the water around the shores and islands of Poole Harbour in Dorset as efforts continue to clear a spill from a nearby oil field pipeline. Around 200 barrels or 60 tonnes of fluid, which includes oil, leaked yesterday. The RSPB says it's very concerned after oiled birds were spotted nearby. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, will use a meeting of the party's ruling executive tomorrow to formalise plans to block Jeremy Corbyn standing for Labour in the next general election. Sir Keir will put forward a motion saying the party's election prospects would be significantly diminished if his predecessor was to stand. A man suing the Oscar-winning actor Gwyneth Paltrow has given evidence in her trial over a skiing collision nearly 7 years ago. The retired optometrist Terry Sanderson wants $300,000 after claiming he suffered life-altering injuries when she skied into him. Ms. Paltrow denies she caused the collision and is countersuing. Our North America correspondent Nomia Iqbal has that story.
Plaintiff, you may call your next witness.
It was a hit and run on the ski slope that this man says destroyed his life. 76-year-old Terry Anderson claims Gwyneth Paltrow was reckless.
Everything was great, and then I heard something I've never heard at a ski resort, and that was a blood-curdling scream. Just, I can't do it. It was, and then, boom.
They had never met, but collided at the very upscale Deer Valley Resort in Utah back in 2016.
Why'd you tell her to leave?
Mr. Sanderson teared up, telling the court how his injuries had changed his relationships with his children and contributed to his split from his partner.
And I said, I'm not sure I'm going to get back to normal again. And I don't want you to feel like that I'm a crippled vet and you're going to stick it out with me.
As well as those injuries, Mr. Sanderson says he can no longer enjoy wine tasting and has been suffering from another personality inhabiting his body.
It's the other personality that's inhabiting my body right now.
And you blame Gwyneth Paltrow for that?
Yes.
Gwyneth Paltrow has already spoken, accusing Terry Sanderson of being at fault.
I was skiing and 2 skis came between my skis, forcing my legs apart, and then there was a body pressing against me.
It basically comes down to skiing etiquette. Who was the downhill skier and had right of way? Gwyneth Paltrow's children, Apple and Moses, are set to testify before a jury is expected to decide later this week. Nomia Iqbal, BBC News, Washington.
80 years ago today, an aircraft carrier blew up and sank off the southwest coast of Scotland in one of the worst wartime disasters in UK waters. But at the time, it was all hushed up. It took just 8 minutes for HMS Dasher to sink in the Firth of Clyde in 1943. 379 crewmen died. but there were only 23 official burials, with many families suspecting their loved ones were buried in unmarked graves. Hugh Pym reports now from North Ayrshire, where he's been speaking to the daughter of one crew member who went down with his ship.
All those who died when Dasher sank in these waters.
A lament for those lost when HMS Dasher went down 80 years ago today. Dame Myrie Richardson remembers her father George, close to where the disaster happened.
Looking out at Arran, people must have been able to see sailors struggling for their lives in the water. It's almost like a river. You could swim it. You don't often get a tragedy that happens so close to you. It's almost touchable.
The aircraft carrier blew up and sank in calm waters. The cause isn't clear, but it didn't involve enemy action. There are continuing questions about what happened to many of those on board. Bill Watson's father was asked to help collect bodies as they were washed up on local beaches. He told his son about what he witnessed.
They would get 6 onto these ambulance trailers of these poor souls, and they would be taken to local mortuaries. His estimation, him and his small group, certainly greater than 50.
Dame Myrie has personally funded a drone survey of Sander Island off the Mull of Kintyre, one location where she believes bodies could be buried.
And that's precisely in the location that the eyewitness identified.
It is.
Along with local historian Graham, she says the results are worthy of further investigation.
Really, the characteristics of this scan are associated with a burial and perhaps with a mass burial.
This weekend, relatives of those who died when HMS Dasher sank gathered in Ardrossan. 80 years on, they still feel they want answers.
I was 4 when Dad was killed.
And it's been a bit of a mystery ever since?
It has, yes.
The Royal Navy said the creation of a mass unmarked grave would run counter to Admiralty policy on the burial of wartime casualties. But Myrie says she won't stop asking questions.
Well, it makes me very sad. And 80 years is a long time. And by the time 100 years comes, I won't be here. So I've got a limited time to find these men.
Dame Myrie Richardson there, ending that report from Hugh Pym. Now, time for a look at the weather news, and Chris Fawkes is here. Hi there, Chris.
Hi, Clive. Well, we had a decent day of weather today. Most of us had lots of sunshine around. The sunniest spot was Glasgow, managing a little over 11 hours of sunshine. And although the air felt a little bit cool, there's actually a bit of warmth in that late March sunshine. The fine weather was brought to us thanks to this area of high pressure. The first one I reckon we've had in a little over 3 weeks. Shame it only lasted the one day, because on into tomorrow we're back into the same kind of weather we've had for much of the month, and that means again we'll be totting up these rainfall stats. Some places, Sussex, we've already had about 2.25 times the amount of rainfall we'd normally see in an average March, so it's already been really wet and there's more rain on the way. That change starting to take place overnight tonight as the winds pick up and outbreaks of rain spread to Northern Ireland, eventually the wet weather reaching western parts of Scotland, England and Wales. As the milder air pushes in, temperatures reach around 8 to 10 degrees in the west, but still a few pockets of frost across eastern Scotland, 1 or 2 into eastern England, where it might just about start off on a bright note, but otherwise cloudy with these outbreaks of rain. Now, some of the rain is going to be quite heavy tomorrow as it sweeps its way eastwards. It does tend to brighten up in Northern Ireland, but only to a mixture of sunshine and heavy thundery showers. It will be turning milder in the west, 14 degrees in Belfast, but on the chilly side for the time of year, eastern Scotland, eastern England, about 9 or 10 degrees for many. It does turn milder, though, into the middle part of the week as these southwesterly winds continue to strengthen. Although it turns milder, it's not going to be turning any drier. We've got heavy outbreaks of rain, some of which is likely to be thundery with a bit of hail mixed in. Probably some of the wettest weather looks set to be heading into parts of Wales. Now, the temperatures could reach around 15, possibly 16 degrees for Wednesday, might even get to 17 in some parts of the country on Thursday. But the unsettled weather pattern stays with us to finish the month out, and April showers, well, we're well used to those, aren't we? Either way, it looks like it's going to be pretty wet for the next few days. Clive.
OK, Chris, thank you for that. Chris Fawkes there. And that's it. More analysis of the day's main stories, of course, on Newsnight, which is just getting underway now on BBC Two. But the news continues, of course, here on BBC One as we join our colleagues across the nations and regions for all the news where you are. Have a very good night.
Hello, I'm Mark Edwards with your sport. The